This is a very auspicious occasion for me because I had never have done this before. And the other, this morning I was thinking of where does one start? And what came to me was the fact that the first week after Bob had dropped his body, my wife at the time, Sheila, a person who was born in the old country, came up to me and said, I want to go to Ireland and take the kids with me to meet my mother. And I said, okay, we'll see how we can do that. And it was only after realizing that I didn't have enough money in the bank or coming, even though I was working full-time as a textbook publisher's representative in Los Angeles, in the Inglewood, Westchester area, that I had enough to get her there and the kids. And a whole adventure started. And at the time not realizing it, of course, the adventure was, for me, where instead of being a human being having a spiritual experience, which I learned all my life, that this and this was supposed to be, it was the transitional time from becoming that particular type of mindset or heart set, spirit set, that I was a spiritual being having a human experience. The importance of that is beyond words. So I ended up getting the tickets, which were easy to acquire since I was only living 2 or 3 miles from Los Angeles Airport, right off La Tierra and Centinela. And they went. And I went about my business, which was calling on colleges and universities, the professors. And came about the end of April, and because of my proficiency in playing golf, I qualified for the Southern California Amateur Championship in Pebble Beach golf course. And remember going down to Sears to get a backpack, because this is the first time I felt I would have an opportunity to go camping in Big Sur. So I was looking forward to all of that, and I had a new Toyota station wagon, one of the first ones that they produced, which turned out to be a lemon. And I went off to Pebble Beach and stayed at I don't know where I stayed. Oh, that's right. What happened was I got up there the night before the day I was to play the first round to qualify for the quarterfinals, and I qualified to play in the quarterfinals. And I remember going into the locker room of the Pebble Beach Country Club and talking with the locker room attendant, and I asked him, I said, where can one go if one wanted to go camping? Oh, he said, just go outside and get on Pacific Coast Highway and just go south. You'll know where to stop. So I did that, and it was dusk turning to evening, and I realized that I had gone 35 or 40 miles, and it was completely dark, and there was no lights. I said, how am I going to do this? I can't do this. That's crazy. I wouldn't even know where to stop. So as I kind of said that, I saw a light in the corner of my eye, or down that way. And I said, well, I think I'll go over by this light and see what's what. So I drove down there, and sure enough, when I got to there was this light on a pole, and it was shining kind of halfway on a area where you could park your car. So I just pulled head in and got out of the car, and I looked around, and I couldn't tell anything, you know. There's hardly any light that I could see where I was, other than this area. So I opened up the back of the Toyota station wagon and laid out my sleeping bag in the back of the car. And I just got in and closed the door and fell asleep. It was a very tiring day. And get up in the morning, light, it was about 7 o'clock, 7:30. Since that is on the west, you know, looking over the Pacific, the sun had not come up above the mountain, so it was still kind of dusk, dawn's early light. So I had to relieve myself, so I went over to the bushes there, and as I did that, I was looking down, and I saw all these buildings, the cabins or whatever, and on the two patios or whatever around two of these cabins were a woman in one and a woman in another, totally nude, laying out and just enjoying the atmosphere. And I said, whoa, I said, I gotta go find out what this place is all about. So after about 15 minutes of brushing up and all that, I just started walking down the hill, and I passed a sign that said Esalen Institute. 6 months later, I was coming up from that Esalen Institute's sign, although there were occasions during this whole time where I used to go back down to the house in Los Angeles just to check the mail. Very interesting stories for another time. And I was writing letters to my wife at the time and sending money, but there was no idea in my head to go and just get a loan out of the bank to pay enough to get the tickets back to her at that particular time. So in the process of this experience at Esalen, it was the time when Oscar Icazo and his group came back from Chile, and that crowd included George Leonard, who wrote, what was the name of that book, Ecstasy and Education or something like that. John Lilly, who became a kind of friend of mine, who wrote a great book, which the government took off the shelves, called Programming and Metaprogramming in the Human Biocomputer, which basically said, whatever you believe is true, but it's only true as long as you believe it. Stuff like that. I just hung out. I hung out with a guy whom the hippie trip was named after. The book was written by a professor at San Fernando Valley State College about this character. I stayed with him in his trailer with his two women gopis. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to me, my mother, who lived in New York City in Jackson Heights, she was getting concerned why the kids and my wife weren't coming back, to from the old country. And she sent the tickets over to them. I didn't find out about this until years later because my wife didn't tell me. I always wonder, how did that all happen? I did send money to her, almost enough for her to do it, but oh yeah, okay, this reminds me, it came about June. So they've been over there for 2 months, living with their mom, and the father had passed, so there was room in the house. She and I, before the 3 children, or 3, we took 2 of the kids over there, and we stayed at their house in Glasnevin outside of Dublin. Her dad was a cop. So I knew that she was okay, but it wasn't like the old woman in the shoe. And it was the check from the IRS. I had gotten $1,015 back. And when I went up to the teller, I gave it to him, and I said to him, "Is it okay that I signed her name?" And he said, he looked at me and he said, no, they just passed the new rule that both parties have to sign it. There's a lot of divorces going on with one party or the other would sign both names and they're gone. Well, I said, well, what do I do? He said, well, put it in an envelope and send it over to her and have her send it back, and then we can go through that. Well, it turns out I did that and the post office lost it. Never returned. It took a year before the government would print it and send me the check. That was the main thing, and it was impossible for me to save enough money for that ticket. I didn't even think about asking a friend or whatever. Although I did put an ad in the newspaper asking if anybody would be willing to fund me. So I think I inadvertently started the GoFundMe thing. Oh, God. Anyway, so here we are. And she comes back, and in the month before, my compatriot in the business who was working Northern California and parts further north called me up and asked me if he could come down with his wife Carol and their 2 kids and their dog Owsley and stay with us, and he wanted to take the kids to Disneyland. So I said, Ray, sure. Ray's father was formerly director or DDO for the CIA, Ray Carlucci. And in the process of his stay, one evening, it was about 4 days, he asked me if I ever had taken LSD. And I said, no, not really. It's funny you mentioned that. He says, Jack, when I first came up to your door and you opened it up, I knew you had changed. And sure enough, I had smoked, I had initially at the age of 32, had my first joint, which I thought was a wonderful trip. And it kind of started within me a feeling that one can survive an alternative experience and still come out okay, because it was kind of different, completely different. So the next evening, I ingested what he told me after the fact was 1,500 micrograms of pure Owsley LSD, given to him by Owsley Stanley, who was a close friend of his, a lifetime supply. And I remember his wife was acting as a kind of a guide to the two of us. And I remember wanting to shed my clothes because it was, for me, like shedding my ego. And I remember taking off all my clothes in the middle of the living room and hitting the floor and just going out. And I was taken on a trip through the universe. Just came back down, came back. And that was the first time in my life I asked myself, who am I, what am I doing here, and where am I going? Basically, in whatever way my mind was working at the time. And that started me on what became a magnificent obsession. I had to find out who I was, what this life is all about. It's just not enough for me to live out everybody else's suppositions. You're supposed to get married, you're supposed to have a job, you're supposed to have kids, you're supposed to this, you're supposed to that. And as far as my wife is concerned, she thought I was going crazy. But to me, it didn't matter. And I kept my job, and it turned out that the company that hired me to move from New York City, where I had lived for 30 years of my life and worked that territory, to come out to Los Angeles, unbeknownst to me, the company had a hidden agenda, because they hired myself along with about 6 others who were considered the best salesmen in the publishing business to promote their only book. It was a book called Biology by Helena Curtis. And it became we sold enough where it became an instant bestseller and put them on the map. And then they fired all of us. So, but unbeknownst to me, Baba was obviously directing all of this, because when the president of that company called Worth came out and came to my place and stayed an hour or so to tell me that I was being fired, and Friday, I had another job on Monday with another publisher, so that took care of that. But it was $3,000 or $4,000 less than I was making, which forced me to move to a duplex right near LA Airport, which to me was the pits, and it was probably the real low point in my life, where here I was married with 3 kids and facing a dead end. So I called my brother-in-law, who worked for another company in the publishing industry, and that was in law book publishing. And I called him up and I said, Des, how much money do you make a year? And he said, oh, 18 and a half, sometimes 20, but usually around 18,000 or so. I said to myself, he's no salesman. And here I am, knowing that I'm quite proficient, having made over $250,000 for one publisher in 1 year, that I can do that. So I said, would you please get a hold of your sales manager and tell him that I'm looking to work, for him, if that was an agreement we could come to. And he said, okay. And sure enough, Des calls me back about a week later. He says, it's interesting that you call me when you call me, because Dick Wolf was his name, has called a sales meeting that will take place in Los Angeles in 2 weeks. Can you meet him there? I said, yeah. So all that happened. And I met Dick in the lounge bar at LA Airport. And I told him, I said, you know, after we talked for 15, 20 minutes, half hour, had a highball, and going away, I said, Dick, I won't bust your chops if you don't bust my chops. And just walked away. Well, he held on to my reason for not saying yes to him until I cleared it with the company that I was. That's the kind of loyalty I have. It's inherent. And when I did say, yeah, I'm okay, let's go, I was to take over the territory in Phoenix, in Arizona, and New Mexico, and El Paso, Texas. So we moved, and I went on a probationary period of getting paid $200 a week, because this was a direct commission job, where eventually I would have to go out every morning having to make $1. You know, if I didn't, I didn't. And within 6 months, I was making over $30,000 a year. Crazy. But I still hadn't found the answer. The answer I was looking for was the answer I was looking for. And I would read every conceivable metaphysical book I could find. I was traveling for all the cities in Southern California and New Mexico and Arizona, not in Southern California, but in Arizona, in New Mexico. And then I started flying to San Francisco, flying to New York, flying to Dallas, Houston, and I would try to find out who were the people that were in the metaphysical life, theosophy and all that stuff. And everyone that I went to, I would walk away saying, telling them, you don't have the answer. You don't have the answer. You really don't know. You know, all that stuff. I was going crazy in that regard. I was willing to die. I got to the point where I was willing to die to find that answer. Mir Baba's face or his name never came across my consciousness during all that time. I suspect it did, but I wasn't conscious that that may have happened. So here I was in that state of mind, but still being able to switch back to the everyday things of life. And I was living in Scottsdale, right near the Pima Indian Reservation. Scottsdale at that time was still dirt roads. Camelback Drive and McDowell were the only two, and Scottsdale Road itself and the T were the only paved roads in that whole area. And I had just gotten back from, now I was regional sales manager for the Western United States, excluding California, which had its own publishing kind of arm, because the laws in California were quite different than the laws in the rest of the country. And I had just gotten back from Dallas on Thursday and spent all day up in my little room, which had open doors on it like this, And the next morning was Saturday morning, and I came down for breakfast, and Sheila was in there and the kids were around the table, and I had a suitcase in my hand. And I didn't say anything, I walked out to the what do they call, Arcadian door in the back of the carport, opened up my rented, brand new Buick LeSabre, which I love that car, and opened up the trunk to the thing, and to the suitcase in the back, and closed the trunk, walked back in the house, and I said to Sheila, she was in the kitchen looking at me over the counter, that kind of configuration, and I looked at her and I said, I'm not coming back until I find an answer, and walked out. Got in the car, drove out to Scottsdale, said to myself, where am I going? I think I'll go to San Diego. So I got on, I went on 8, US 8, all the way to San Diego, and stopped on Mission Drive there and got a motel room for the night. Got up the next morning, and I said, this is crazy. This is absolutely, I'm going crazy. And I don't know what to do. I really don't know what to do. And I said, well, I think I'll just go back to Scottsdale and chalk it up. And I got in the car, and I changed my mind. I said, no, I'm going to go up to Esalen and take a workshop. And maybe that will decrease this craziness that I'm going through. So I drove up all the way to Esalen Institute, signed up for a workshop with George Brown. He and Judith, he used to run, had a business, a practice in Santa Barbara, and he would give workshops a couple of times a year. And since I was known there, I didn't have to pay the $800. They just said, Jack, just go and he'd take care of it. And I did. And came a Wednesday evening, and I decided to go to New York City and go up to the president's house and straighten this whole thing out as far as work was concerned, because I was having a memo fight with the editor-in-chief, who was not my boss. The sales manager was my boss, and but he was kind of the guy that bowed to this guy, editor-in-chief, who couldn't sell his way out of a paper bag if he had the opportunity to. And I resented having to deal with him because it broke the chain of command. But at the same time, in this process of the 2.5 years that I had now been working for the company, the president of the company was named Birmingham, Matt Birmingham, who became my kind of backup mentor, because the Burkes and the Birminghams had a history going back to the Battle of Hastings, 1066. In 1542, the Birminghams took over with all the Burke properties. Crazy. And he knew that, and he knew that I knew that. Okay. So whenever I went to New York City, I'd go into his office, and he'd bring out the scotch, and we'd blah, 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 blah. So I felt very comfortable. in my own heart, dealing with Matt. And Dick always backed me. Dick Wolf always backed me. But I arranged with one of the staff members at Esalen to take care of my car, drive me up to Monterey Airport, because I was going to New York City to get this straightened out one way or the other. I wanted to be national sales manager. I knew I could handle that. And Dick was Dick was of a nature that I knew he wanted to get out of the business. He was tired of living Monday to Friday in New York City and taking a train to Lancaster, Pennsylvania on Friday and coming back on Monday morning, and I kind of knew all that stuff. So I thought this is a good time to put my name in the hat. So, the man I chose to do this was a Shakespearean actor named Paul, I think it was Paul something or other. And he was an individual that could run a workshop, have everybody lay on the floor, step aside, sit down, and pluck a string on the lute, and you'd be on the ceiling looking at yourself on the floor. That's how good he was. And he did that a number of times. I was involved in one or two of them. So I said, well, blah, 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 blah. So he took me up to Monterey. I took a United flight to San Francisco and got my first class ticket to New York. Didn't get a round trip incident. I had an air travel card, so it was no big deal. Which proved to be a teeny little story on its own. And I flew to New York, rented a car, and I drove up to Norwalk, Connecticut, where the president's house was. Knocked on the door. A minute or two later, it opened. His wife said, "Hello, John, we've been expecting you." I never contacted anybody all those times. But I just took that as normal, you know. And I sat in the foyer, and she said, "Matt will be home in a few minutes. He's coming up on the New Haven train." And that all happened. And Matt, and the three of us sat around the table. His wife cooked a meal, gathered up the dishes, and left. And here Matt and I went at it, tooth and nail. Never forget that. He was as gracious as he could be. And he said, "Jack," he said, "I have to ask you to step down from your position as Western Regional Manager." And I'm saying to myself, did I really do this? I mean, to the point where my life is at another dead end and whatever, and all that stuff going through my mind. This time it was at 11 o'clock at night, 11:30 practically. And I said, "Matt, excuse me, do you mind if I go outside and take a walk and think about it?" What I really wanted to do is go out and take a pee, so I went out and anyway, I came back in and I sat down catty-corner to him. And I said, "Matt, let me go back and do what I was doing. I promise in my heart I won't say it." He said, and he slammed his fist on the table, boom, like that. He says, "Damn it, Jack, I know what you're doing is right, but I have to live with those people every day. And for me to leave you in the position you're in would weaken me in my position as far as they're concerned. And I don't want to do that. In fact, they're my friends. I mean, I've lived with these guys for years. I can't do that. All right, whatever. So that was the end of that. And he goes in, he calls up, Tom Holland was his name, and talks with Tom, gives me the phone, and has me agree with Tom that I would meet him in JFK, at American Airlines the next morning. And I said, okay. So Matt brings me up and said, this is your room. And I had no expectations at all about anything at that particular time. And God bless him, 15, 20 minutes later, he walks in with his boxer shorts on and comes over and tucks me in. He says, you okay? Is everything okay? And he says, don't worry. He says, I want to make you director of a new company I'm starting, which was really, in its way, would have been a predecessor to the Huffington Post. It was going to be a very extensive business letter to all the attorneys throughout the country. And I'm sure you could take that and add and end up having the same thing. And if you don't mind me backtracking a bit, 6 months before all this happened, he had asked me to give him a report on the meaning of computers as it affected the publishing industry. And I did that for him. And it ended up being a page and a half saying, get into computers or get out of the business because you're not going to last. Which turned out to be true, because 4 or 5 years later, they sold the company. The company was sold, whatever. It was an arm of the Times Mirror Corporation, which runs the LA Times and Newsday on Long Island and 14, 15 other companies. I went to sleep. I got up. He was already gone. I get in the car. I drove down to JFK, known as Idlewild at that time. Met him in the Ambassador Lounge. I was sitting at a table having a cup of coffee. He came in. He's a short guy, Napoleon type, seriously. Left his overcoat on, put his hat aside, fedora, he wore a fedora. And he said, I need your airport, I need your airline transportation card and the national telephone card. So I gave it to him. Started futzing around in my suit jacket. He said, what are you doing? I said, I'm looking for the key to the executive washroom. I don't know what to do with it. And he just disgusted. He got up. He said, let's go downstairs and I'll get you a ticket back to San Francisco. So we went down to the ticket agent. At that time, credit cards and cash was still allowed. And there was an individual ahead of us, and he finished. And Tom asked the agent for a ticket to the economy ticket to San Francisco, and I put my hand on his left shoulder. I says, Tom, I came in first class and I'm going out first class. He didn't want me to have to complain to Matt that he didn't do what I asked him to do. I knew that instantly. So he got me a first class ticket and left. American Airlines at that time didn't have a very big area to begin with, but they had, I think, about 6 gates, and that was it. And we're all in the line. But you had to walk up a ramp, a curved ramp. And as I was walking up that curved ramp, I said to myself, God, I still haven't found an answer. And then the words of Scholar O'Hara and Gone with the Wind came to mind. And I said this, murmured this out loud. Well, I'll just put it aside and think about it tomorrow. And as I turned the curve in the ramp, down maybe 100 feet or whatever, 125 feet, I noticed a gentleman in a white suit facing the area where you got your boarding pass, the boarding pass area. I said, oh, that guy looks interesting. I think I'll look him up on the plane. That's the only thought that came to me, and then it just disappeared. And I ambled up to the boarding pass to get my boarding pass. And at that time, there was just one desk, 2 people, and a white high trestle kind of lattice work separating them from the Gateway Lounge, which could hold maybe 200 people. There weren't a lot of seats. There were just seats sitting around the walls. Everybody else was standing. And I got my boarding pass. And started to go towards the end of the trestle. And I always did that slowly, because if it was too crowded and there was no seats, I would wait till everyone got on board. Or if there was a seat right near the door, I would beeline to it and sit down there and get on the plane right away before the rush. And I had my briefcase in my right hand. I put the boarding pass in my jacket pocket. And said, it's 15 minutes to go, I'll put up with the crowd. And before I could even put that thought away, a lane opened, and there was an empty seat right next to the door. And boy, did I start moving. I was striding, and as I was striding across the floor, I got to about the middle, and the whole airport disappeared. And before my eyes was Mayor Baba's face. Astounding. It was at about a 9:30 level, and it was taking the Chase Studio photograph. No, it was actually, I'm sorry, it's the one that sticks in my mind a lot. It was taking the Compassionate Father turned aside. Well, the Compassionate Father, Baba was staring right at me. The one that was taken in 1936. The most beautiful photograph in the world to me. And my left hand went up and my finger was out, and I heard in my ears my voice saying, "That's Mayor Baba." And those words gave me utter, absolute conviction that this was God. I had never heard of it before. I'd never seen the face before, yet, again, beyond words. This illusion came back into view, and I was over at the tail end of the Gateway Lounge, looking at this, at the same image. I mean, the same thing was happening. And I said it again, thinking that I was going like this, but I was actually going like that, to a button on the lapel of Fred Stankus, who was the guy in the white suit, who was sitting way over in the corner by himself because he was on standby, number 29 on standby, as he said. Because when I got up from my seat next to him, what had happened was, after I said, "That's Mayor Baba," the second time, it was sort of like, at the same time the world was coming back into my view, and I can remember myself kind of sitting down, and Fred starts telling me about Baba, and I say, I know. So 5 or 10 minutes, Baba, I know. Oh yeah, I know. That's all I can say, because I did know. And how I knew, I don't know. And then they announced the boarding pass. I get up, I said, "Fred, I'll see you on the plane." He says, "No, I'm 29th on standby." I says, "Fred, I'll see you on the plane." I get on the plane, and at that time, the 747s had 3 double seats on each side of the craft, with this huge feast down the middle of fruits and nuts and whatever, salads. And my seat was the 3rd one on the left, and I sat by the window. And the doors close, and the engines start up, and they go on for a minute or two, and then all of a sudden they just reversed and died. And the cabin door of the first class opens up, and in walks the stewardess with Fred Stankus in tow to get the last seat in the house next to me. Only the boss could engineer that one. And that was it. We took off. That was March 31st, 1972, 9:30 in the morning, Gate 5 of American Airlines. And Horse the Planets was playing on the Muzak. And Fred spent most of his time telling me about Mayor Baba, and I was out of it. I was looking out the windows. It was daylight, and I didn't hear a thing he said the whole trip because it didn't really matter to me. I had found my answer. It's an indescribable bliss. And what was my destiny? My destiny was to leave my family. If I have any regrets, it's the regret of not being able to grow up with the kids. Because my wife wanted a divorce, and a month after I got back, she said, "Leave." And I understood where she was coming from. Her belief system is based on the Irish Catholic whatever. And I did. And then she came over to my house, which is down the road, and I was in a lot of pain. I had 3 great kids who I'd spent, as much time as I could, because I was traveling 3 weeks a month. I used to take them to the zoo and, once I went on a ride with John, my second son, all the way to see Leatrice in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Meherwan, her husband, Bob. And it turned out that his book on linear algebra was a book that I used to sell when I worked for Addison Wesley, New York City. I mean, all these little teeny connections just keep going on and on and on. And John and I went out and hitched a ride, and we sat in the back of a pickup truck in the open air all the way to Las Cruces. Never spent any more time with him. Anyway, the whole thing came to the fact that she came over to the apartment. I was living in a singles-only apartment complex, and wanted to make hopefully for her a reconciliation, which is, I said, I'll do that, but not today. It's a work day. Saturday. It'll be fine. So kind of disappointed, I guess, in her desire. She walked to the door, opened it up, looked at Baba's picture on the wall and said, well, it's either him or me. And I spontaneously said, lady, there isn't any choice. And that was the end of the marriage. And from then on, that's a whole new adventure. And as I said to Robin, that this could take 3 hours if I ever wanted to get into it, but I think it would not be appropriate. So a lot of you know who I am or what know of me, and the fact that I worked with Irwin for 3 years on the Must film, and in 2004 Baba called me to Meherwan to work on the Divyavanis, well, actually to work on his discourses, and also to do the Divyavanis and so on and so on. So I thank you for listening. Appreciate that. Jai Baba to all of you. To me, Baba had other things in mind. And it started, and I knew something was going on, because I would go out every time the bus went out from Meherwan to Meherzad, and I couldn't get up Seclusion Hill. I would go so far and I'd stop, and a wall was thrown up. And I come back the next time, the next Thursday or Saturday or Tuesday or Sunday, whatever, and I would go 40, 50 yards and I'd stop again. Just turn around and go back down. And this went on and on. There must have been 6 or 7 times that this happened. And once I had actually gotten up to the very top, except for that 3-foot leap or stretch to get onto the actual plane of the top, which I had noticed even from the distance of my eyes that something had happened. It had just gone like that. Well, it used to be like this. And I just gave up every time and just walked back all the way down. And this time was on a Thursday, and I was leaving a day or two later. And I was leaving Monday morning here for Bombay. And I had no intention of coming out on Sunday, because I'd be packing and all that stuff. And that was the time that I had gotten just to that level. And when I came down and started walking through the area by the blue bus to get into Mandalay Hall, or at least to at least hang around, because it was almost 12:30. Meherwan was literally waiting for me. And I remember just kind of walking into his arms, because I wanted to give him a hug anyway. And as he put his arms around my back, I got hit with a lightning bolt, literally. My whole spine just went like that, and it was a shock. And it was a shock that I had gotten in a dream 25 years before. So I knew something was happening. And I looked into Meherwan's eyes, and Baba's eyes were just looking out at me saying, "Come and help." And I backed off and didn't say anything. I didn't say yes or no. I didn't know what to say. And I just went over and sat down on the bench in front of Mandali Hall. And people started coming out, and I just got up and I went on the bus back. And right before that exit, I said to Meherwan, I said, "Do you mind if I come out tomorrow?" He said, "Oh, yes. So I made that arrangement. And I came out, sat in the same spot. Meherwan came out of his room, walked over, and started to walk. As he was passing by the clock, I said to him, he said to me, "Do you want to talk with Falu now?" And I looked at him, I said in my mind, I said, "I'm not interested in talking to Falu." Never liked the guy. And I said, "No, I need to get up to Seclusion Hill." "Oh," he said, and he waved his hand, he said, "Yeah, I'll go talk to the Lord." So I did, and I got up all the way. And I walked across the top of Seclusion Hill, and I sat down on a rock. I looked down over the compound, and I said, "Baba, what the hell are you doing with me? I can't come here." And I just kind of let it all out, and I said, this and that and the other. I don't deserve this, and what? I don't need to come here. I don't want to come here. What's going on? And I said, "I don't have any money." And I started crying, which is normal, I guess. And I just and a glint hit me. I reached down in the crevice of a rock is where the glint was coming from, and I was able to get my finger down there, my thumb, and I pulled out a 50 paisa piece. And I said, "Oh, okay. That's taken care of." And I said, "Well, chastity, I'm 60, 67, 68 years of age. I said, I think I can handle all that. But obedience, forget about it. I am not an obedient person. I'm just not an obedient person. And if you can deal with that, I can deal with it, okay?" Not that I was bargaining with him, it was just that this is who I am. I knew myself well enough to know that I'm addicted. To me, life is an addiction, and there's just certain parts of it that you're addicted to. And I said, "I don't know what's going to happen," and all that, and blah, 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 blah. And I looked over, and I saw this piece of cloth. It was kind of stringy. And it was under a little bush, about this high. And I reached over my left hand, and I pulled it out. And it was about this long, and I looked at it, and I said, "Oh, okay. This is the stamp. When you're in Franciscans, you get a cincture. And on the cincture is 3 knots, for poverty, for chastity, and obedience. And this cincture had 3 knots on it. I've got these 2 pieces of validation. They're treasures. And I said, okay, Baba, you got me. And I walked down the hill and made arrangements to come out to see Fowler the next day. And that's how that happened. And Meherwan, who as Marge knows, I never realized that Bob had said that he was a 6-plane Salik. To me, he was the most natural human being I've ever met. We became friends enough where I could just walk over to him and grab his hand and we'd go off for a walk. So, a gift. So that's it. Thank you.
Tell about your last encounter with him.
That was, whew. Heather called a publications committee meeting in Meherwan, roughly the middle of March, I think, 3 years ago, I guess. And I went out. I think I went out in somebody's car, I don't remember. Maybe on the bus, I don't know, doesn't matter. And the table was set up, and the table was the long table out in front of Alva's old room and connected to the next room down the line. And all the chairs were all set up. And I was waiting for Meherwan to come out of his room so I could give him a hug and we'd walk over together. Well, he didn't show right away. And so I figured I better get myself a seat. So I picked the seat facing the table on the monthly hall side. And there was another chair that was empty and another chair at the corner facing in that was empty. And Meherwan came out and sat down at the one facing the building. And I started to get up to move to the second seat. And this guy from Australia, Roy something or other, boom. Okay, no. And he started yakking. And I looked over at Meherwan, and Meherwan was sort of saying, well, I got to put up with this guy, until the thing starts. Anyway, it started. The publication meeting started with Heather and Ward and Balaji and all these people. And a deep-set feeling of something going to happen got into my system. And I found myself almost totally unable to express this feeling, obviously, which I can look back on and said was grief, was I don't know what else. What other words? It was just vibrating my whole system, and I was trying to control it. And I would look over at Meherwan and found him staring at me. And every time I did that, what I saw in my own eyes was he kind of dissolving into where only his face and his eyes. It was like he was like in the conch shell, and everything was dark behind him, but his eyes were shining through, and he was telling me, do not do what you feel is happening to you. Just hold on to it. And it was excruciating because the meeting took 45 minutes, and I was spent that 40 or 45 minutes just holding on, literally, to the table, and just trying to keep it together. And I would look over, and he was still staring at me. So I was able to do that. I found out later, just this week, when Tom Riley gave a talk, he said that happened to him when he was sitting next to Baba, and Baba put his finger down, and Eric said, Baba says, don't. That's what was happening with me. And anyway, the meeting was over, and before this guy Roy could do anything, I was blocking him from Meherwan. Meherwan got up, and we held hands, and we walked towards his room, and he let go halfway there. And as he was walking away, I said, Meherwan, please be around when I get back. And he said, I don't have any decision about that, to that effect. It's not for me to make that determination. And he died 3 months later. So, I miss him. Yeah. Great friend. Great friend. And he said every time that we finished the walk, and a couple of times just the two of us, more often it was Steve or Joseph who would come with, Steve would drive his car out there, which was a gift in itself because taking the bus is horrible. And he would say at the end, say Baba's name, say Baba's name. Don't forget to say Baba's name. Baba told him it's the most important thing. It's more powerful than he is. And even he, Baba, is. Just say his name. That was really his only, what would you call it? I don't know what words to use. I don't remember any of the stories. It was just, Steve and I would walk away, we'd get in the car, we'd leave the gate, and just, we'd be in bliss. I mean, whatever bliss is, I don't know. But it was that feeling of bliss. It was just beyond words again. Just, wow. We were fortunate to experience that. It's just a gift. And it never changed.